February 24, 2000, Huntsville, Texas, 6:18 p.m. Betty Lou Beets lay strapped to a gurney, the cold metal pressing against her frail body, waiting for the state to take her life. At 62, she had 5 children, 9 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. She looked like any grandmother you might pass in a grocery store aisle or wave to at a church picnic. But Betty wasn't there to bake cookies or tell bedtime stories. She was there because she had crossed a line that few could even imagine. She was about to become only the second woman executed in Texas since the death penalty was reinstated. The state was ending her life for murder. Cold, calculated murder. When the warden asked if she had any last words, Betty said nothing. No apologies, no pleas, no explanations. She gave only a small, almost serene smile to her lawyer and her pastor before closing her eyes. 2 coughs, 1 sharp breath, and then silence. What makes her story so terrifying is not just that she killed, but how methodically she did it. Betty didn't just take 1 life. She didn't take 2. Over the course of more than 2 decades, husband after husband vanished, disappeared under mysterious circumstances, or turned up shot. Some survived. Others were never so lucky. The woman who looked like everyone's sweet, harmless grandmother had turned her own backyard into a cemetery. She buried 2 husbands within steps of her home. One in a decorative wishing well, the other beneath the garage floor. For years, she deceived everyone. Neighbors, police, her own children. They all believed her carefully crafted facade. She collected life insurance, cashed pension checks, and performed the role of the grieving widow with flawless precision while her victims rotted in shallow graves just beyond her kitchen window. But how did a hearing-impaired woman from North Carolina become one of America's most infamous widows? How did she evade suspicion for so long? And what finally exposed the woman behind the mask? To understand the chilling story of Betty Lou Beets, we need to return to a hot summer night in 1983, a quiet lakeside home, and the moment she decided her 5th husband had to die. What followed stunned even the most seasoned investigators. Stay with us, because the truth behind Betty's life and final hours is darker and more disturbing than anyone could imagine. Please like this video, share, and subscribe to our channel to support our effort to bring you stories that are almost lost to time. Cedar Creek Lake, Henderson County, Texas. A quiet Saturday evening, the kind where the stillness seems almost alive. Inside a modest home, Betty Lou Beets sat with 2 men. Her 5th husband, Jimmy Don Beets, lounged in his favorite recliner, exhausted from a week of firefighting in Dallas. His stepson, Robert Branson, had come to visit as he did most weekends. On the surface, the house felt peaceful, isolated, perfect for what Betty had meticulously planned at some point during the evening. Betty pulled Robert aside. She fixed him with a steady gaze, a look that would be etched in his memory forever. "I'm done with Jimmy. I can't do this anymore," she said calmly. Robert assumed she meant divorce. He couldn't have been more wrong. "Jimmy has to die tonight," she added, her voice devoid of emotion, like she was discussing routine chores, not premeditated murder. Then, without offering explanation, she told Robert to leave. "Just go," she said, and he did, driving away without calling the police, leaving his stepfather alone with his mother. Inside the home, Jimmy Don Beets had no warning of what was about to happen. The 46-year-old firefighter dozed in his recliner, the flickering TV casting shifting shadows across the room. Betty walked into the living room carrying a pistol, raised it, and fired twice. Both bullets struck Jimmy in the head. He slumped forward instantly, the chair that had been his comfort turning into his deathbed. Betty stood silently, watching, her face unreadable. No panic, no regret, just cold, calculated intent. 2 hours later, Robert returned home. The kitchen was calm, Betty waiting as though nothing had occurred. Jimmy's body still slumped in the recliner, blood pooling around him. "Help me get rid of the body," she instructed. Together, they carried him to the front yard, to a decorative brick-lined wishing well that Jimmy and Robert had built just months earlier. Once a symbol of innocence and leisure, the well became a grave. They lowered the body inside, wrapped it carefully, sealed it with bricks, and poured concrete over it. When they finished, it looked untouched, beautiful, and ordinary. But Betty's orchestration didn't end there. The next morning, she drove to the marina where Jimmy kept his fishing boat. She crushed up his heart medication, scattering the powder across the deck, while Robert sabotaged the boat's propeller to mimic mechanical failure. They pushed it into Cedar Creek Lake and let it drift. Later, Betty called the police, reporting Jimmy missing after a fishing trip. She feigned worry, fear, grief, convincing everyone she was a devoted, loving wife. For 3 weeks, rescue crews scoured the lake. Divers, helicopters, firefighters, and search teams found nothing. Throughout it all, Betty played the grieving widow perfectly. When the fire department chaplain visited to offer comfort, she inquired not about the search but about life insurance and pensions. "Just practical planning," she said, explaining her curiosity about future benefits. No one suspected that Jimmy lay buried 50 feet from where they sat, hidden beneath a facade of innocence. For Betty, this was the perfect crime, or so she thought. But to understand how Jimmy became her final victim, we must examine Betty's past. She wasn't new to violence, nor was she new to calculated murder. Betty Lou Beets was born March 12, 1937, in Roxborough, North Carolina. Her early years were marked by misfortune. She became mostly deaf after contracting a childhood illness, leaving her partially hearing impaired for life. Betty later alleged abuse by her father, though this claim only surfaced after she faced murder charges. At 12, her mother was institutionalized, forcing Betty to assume the role of caretaker for her younger siblings. Childhood ended prematurely, replaced by responsibility she could hardly comprehend. By 15, Betty married her first husband, Robert Franklin Branson. They had 6 children over 17 turbulent years. The marriage dissolved in 1969, marking the start of a troubling pattern. Over the years, she married 6 men in total, including Bill Lane twice. While Betty later claimed abuse by most husbands, these allegations emerged only after her crimes had been discovered. Her second husband, Bill Lane, survived 2 gunshot wounds she inflicted, once in the stomach, once in the back. Remarkably, she remarried him shortly afterward, though they divorced again within a month. The pattern continued. In 1978, she attempted to run her third husband, Ronnie Thrill, over with her car. He survived. The fourth husband, Doyle Wayne Barker, vanished in 1981. Neighbors assumed he had left voluntarily, and no missing persons report was filed. Betty maintained the same home, acting as if nothing had happened. Doyle remained buried beneath her garage, his absence unnoticed. By the time she met Jimmy Don Beets, Betty's pattern was clear. Husbands married, things deteriorated, violence erupted, sometimes survived, sometimes fatal. Over 20 years, she perfected her system. Marry, kill, collect, repeat. She knew precisely how to manipulate appearances, deceive authorities, and exploit insurance and pension benefits. Yet, confidence would become her undoing. With Jimmy, she grew sloppy, making errors that would eventually expose her crimes. By 1985, Betty Lou Beets thought she had successfully concealed her crimes. Jimmy Don Beets was officially presumed drowned, the case closed, and Betty free to live her life as though nothing had occurred. But the illusion shattered when an anonymous tip reached the Henderson County Sheriff's Office in the spring of that year. The caller provided chilling details about Jimmy's disappearance, information only someone intimately familiar with the crime could know. Investigators, unable to ignore the specificity of the tip, reopened the case and obtained a search warrant for Betty's property. Betty, confident as always, watched calmly from a police car as deputies began to excavate her front yard. Their attention first fell upon the decorative wishing well, what appeared to be a harmless garden feature. A simple brick and concrete structure revealed something horrifying once they broke through the concrete. Inside lay human remains, carefully wrapped and buried. It was Jimmy Don Beets, shot twice in the head, the same weapon that would later link him to another murder. Investigators didn't stop there. Behind the house, under an old garage, they discovered additional remains, badly decomposed from years in the soil. These belonged to Doyle Wayne Barker, Betty's fourth husband, missing since 1981. Ballistics tests confirmed the same .38 caliber pistol had been used in both murders. Evidence at last began to align. Betty Lou Beets had murdered multiple husbands with precision, planning, and cold calculation. The most devastating evidence, however, came from within her own family. Robert Branson, Betty's stepson, came forward and recounted everything to investigators. He detailed the night of Jimmy's murder, how Betty had instructed him to leave, how she committed the shooting, and how they buried the body together in the well. He described the meticulous staging of the fishing accident meant to fool police. Robert's testimony painted a portrait of a woman who killed for profit, devoid of remorse, calculating, and chillingly precise. Financial gain was clearly her motive. Investigators discovered that Jimmy had $110,000 in life insurance and $1,200 per month in pension benefits, all payable to Betty. Without a body, there would have been a 7-year waiting period, but Betty was patient. She killed when she deemed necessary, then waited to collect the rewards. Doyle Wayne Barker had died under similar circumstances, and Betty had secured benefits from his estate as well. Her method was consistent: marry men with assets, endure them only until she saw an opportunity, then remove them permanently. On July 11, 1985, Betty Lou Beets appeared before the 173rd District Court of Henderson County, facing murder charges. She was 48, with a reputation now solidly cemented as a calculating killer. Her defense was audacious. Instead of claiming self-defense, mental illness, or abuse, her lawyers attempted to implicate her children, suggesting they might have committed the murders. The strategy was desperate and would collapse entirely under scrutiny. The prosecution's case was ironclad. They had the bodies, the murder weapon, and the motive. Most crucially, they had Robert Branson. He took the stand and recounted every detail, exposing his mother's actions with devastating clarity. From the moment she told him Jimmy had to die, to the burial in the wishing well, Robert's testimony dismantled Betty's defenses. He described her as selfish, greedy, and devoid of empathy. A woman who murdered not out of passion or defense but for financial gain. On October 11, 1985, the jury rendered its verdict. Betty Lou Beets was found guilty of murder for remuneration. 3 days later, the judge sentenced her to death. She was designated Texas Death Row Inmate number 810 and sent to the Mountain View Unit, now known as the Patrick O'Daniel Unit. Despite the certainty of her fate, Betty refused to concede. She immediately filed appeals, challenging every aspect of her trial, claiming legal incompetence, procedural errors, and insufficient consideration of her history of alleged abuse. Her first appeal yielded temporary success. In 1988, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals overturned her conviction, ruling that insurance and pension benefits did not constitute remuneration under state law. Betty believed she had beaten the system. The reprieve was brief. The state requested a rehearing, and this time, the court determined that the benefits indeed qualified as remuneration. The conviction was reinstated. The next decade was a grueling legal battle. Appeals and motions flowed through the courts, every conceivable avenue explored. The U.S. Supreme Court denied review in 1989. Execution dates were set and stayed, temporary reprieves that extended her time on death row. Betty filed federal habeas corpus petitions, asserting unfair trial proceedings and inadequate counsel. None succeeded. Courts consistently upheld her conviction. Every legal door slowly slammed shut. By 1999, hope was gone. Final appeals were denied. On February 24, 2000, the execution date was set. 15 years after her initial sentencing, Betty Lou Beets faced the ultimate consequence of her crimes. When strapped to the gurney, she maintained the calm, stoic demeanor that had defined her life. No apologies were offered, no explanations given. Only a brief, knowing smile to her lawyer and pastor. Her execution was carried out with clinical precision. 2 sharp breaths, 2 coughs, and Betty Lou Beets was gone, leaving behind a trail of victims, grief, and a chilling legacy. Over 20 years, she had killed methodically, manipulating everyone around her, playing the grieving widow with flawless precision, and exploiting the system for personal gain. Her story is not just about murder. It is a study in calculation, deception, and cold-blooded human nature. Betty Lou Beets was not merely a killer of men. She was a master manipulator of appearances, a woman who understood the power of perception and used it to deadly effect. Her crimes shocked the nation, but her trial, conviction, and execution revealed the full scope of her actions. In the end, justice was served, but the chilling precision of her crimes and the years she spent evading suspicion remain a haunting testament to the darkness that can exist behind the most unassuming faces. In Betty's final days, her daughters made one last desperate attempt to save her life. Justice would be served. In Betty's final days, her daughters made one final, desperate plea for mercy. They appeared before the Texas Board of Pardons and Paroles, clutching photographs and crying. The pictures showed a woman with bruises, a swollen face, and broken bones. "This was our mother," they said. "This is proof that Betty had been abused by every man she married." Her daughters begged the board to spare Betty's life. They argued that she had been a victim, not a monster, that years of abuse and trauma had driven her to commit murder. The board remained unconvinced. They had heard similar claims before, but only after Betty's conviction. During her trial, no evidence of abuse had ever been presented. The execution would proceed as planned. On February 24, 2000, Betty was transferred to the Huntsville unit. She was offered a final meal but declined. She wanted nothing. When asked for last words, Betty remained silent. No apologies to Jimmy's family, no explanations for her crimes, no statements at all. At 6:18 p.m., she was strapped to the gurney in the death chamber. Jimmy's son, Jamie, watched from the witness room, observing the woman who had taken his father's life. Betty showed no fear, no tears, no pleas. Her face was calm, expressionless, like any other ordinary day as the lethal drugs coursed through her veins. She offered a small, almost imperceptible smile to her attorney and pastor. Then came 2 coughs and a sharp gasp. At 6:18 p.m., Betty Lou Beets was pronounced dead. She was 62 years old. Her body was later cremated, and her ashes scattered over her mother's grave. The same mother who had been institutionalized when Betty was 12. Betty left behind 5 children, 9 grandchildren, and 6 great-grandchildren. She left 2 confirmed victims and lingering questions about how many others may have died at her hands. The sweet-looking grandmother had finally paid the ultimate price. Justice was served, yet the scars she left behind will endure forever. Betty became only the second woman executed in Texas since the death penalty's return. Her case raises questions that still divide opinion. Was Betty a victim of abuse who finally snapped, or a calculating killer who used claims of trauma to avoid responsibility? Did her traumatic childhood create a monster, or was she born with darkness inside? The debate over the death penalty continues. Some argue she received what she deserved. Others believe life in prison would have sufficed. What we know for certain: 2 men are dead, families shattered, and a woman who could have been anyone's grandmother became one of America's most notorious killers. What do you think? Was justice served? Or was Betty Lou Beets a product of her circumstances? Let us know in the comments below. If this story shocked you, subscribe for more true crime cases that reveal the darkest corners of human nature. Like this video if it opened your eyes, and share it to inform others about criminals who still lurk unseen.